Welcome to an important Indianomics episode on the eve of the World Leaders Summit for G20. Now, one of India's key objectives during its G20 presidency is to reform the multilateral development banks, that is the World Bank, the International Development Agency, or the IDA, the IBRD, etc., the entire World Bank group. An independent expert group comprising Dr. NK Singh from India and Dr. Lawrence Summers from the US have drawn up a report that aims to reform and energize these institutions to contribute more towards not just poverty alleviation, but global public goods like climate change, sustainability. Besides this, this expert group is asking for a tripling of sustainable lending by 2030, as also more flexible investment arrangements like credit enhancement involving the private sector. One of the authors of this report is our own, very own Dr. NK Singh, and he joins me today. Dr. Singh, thank you very much indeed for finding time for us in what must be very busy days ahead of the World Leaders Summit. Well, my first question to you is there anything in terms of a low-hanging fruit which you are hoping will be pushed in the upcoming World Leaders Summit?
Well, I think that we presented, as you said, our first report to the finance ministers and governors of the central bank in Gandhinagar on the 18th of July. That was subjected to a very detailed discussion, and the finance minister, in her concluding statement, summed up by saying appreciated the report, and that report would certainly be available to the summit of the G20. But this is work in progress, because the second part of the report, each of the reports are, of course, independent entities of their own, but they are, of course, integral to each other. The second part of my report will be presented on the 12th of October to the fourth and final meeting of the finance ministers and governors of central bank under our presidency in Marrakesh. Okay. And that will be the two integrated pieces of our recommendations addressing the rather wide-ranging terms of reference which was given to us by the G20 experts. You are aware of these wide-ranging terms of reference. They have three components to it. First and foremost, of how to make these multilateral development banks, and this goes well beyond, Latha, the World Bank group. Okay. Because as you know, the multilateral development banks include the Asian Development Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the Inter-American Bank, the Bank of Africa for African Development Program. So the multilateral development banks is a wide family, and this report, which we are presenting, covers also the broad issue of the symmetry, cohesiveness, and enhancement of the capability of the multilateral development banks acting in unison and acting as a family instead of acting just individually. So the terms of reference, therefore, has three parts. First, to assess the funding requirements, taking into account the new thing which you mentioned, transboundary goods, the global public goods, the issues of climate, pandemic, fragility of nations, and also how to really substantially enhance the lending capabilities of the multilateral development banks, both by optimizing the balance sheet which exists today, and also to be able to harness additional private capital.
Okay. You know, you wrote a piece, I think it was in the Indian Express, expressing your disappointment over even the total lending done, the balance sheets of, for instance, the World Bank Group. You know, compared to their origin from 1950 to now, the GDPs of the various poor countries has risen manifold, whereas their balance sheet has barely doubled. Would you say capital is the big problem?
No, I would say more than capital. The working methods, the working procedures, and the alacrity with which they are able to harness private capital which is available. To give you one broad ballpark figure, and we brought it out in an article written subsequently, which you may or may not have seen, but I commend that for purposes of improved understanding. The article jointly written by Professor Lawrence Summers and myself, which was published in the Project Syndicate,
Yes.
Shortly after our presentation of our first report on the 18th of July.
Yes.
Broadly speaking, what we pointed out is that the World Bank currently, the World Bank recapitalization for the WBG, so to say, is just $22 billion.
Yes.
Leaving out the question of... Against that, they have lent $900 billion. So in a certain sense, you can say that they have been very efficient financial intermediators in being able to harness their equity. But at the same time, I express my disappointment. When it comes to private capital, the same principle has not been followed, because $1 has only led to $0.6, which is a harnessing of less than even one. Whereas in the other lending operations, they have been shining examples of success of 20 billion leading to 900 billion. So the disappointment was really against the work culture, against the procedures, against the methods, and of course the ability to harness private capital to address this problem of global public goods and transboundary challenges.
I indeed read your Project Syndicate article with Dr. Summers, and in fact, even as you speak, the key takeaways from that passage is running for the benefit of viewers. Now, over there, both of you make the point that one priority is to persuade the donors to provide an additional $30 billion. You know, the numbers you referred to. Now, that looks difficult at this point in time, does it? We had Janet Yellen, when she was attending this meeting in Ahmedabad, saying that they're not very keen on providing additional capital till the World Bank and the other institutions reform themselves. So do you think that's going to be a constraint and that should be taken up in subsequent meetings?
Let me put it this way to you. That our terms of reference enjoins upon us, the first word itself in our terms of reference is to provide a roadmap for an updated MDB system. The roadmap is between now and 2030. There are different ingredients of the roadmap, one of which, of course, is how to enhance the lending capability, of which the foremost component is optimizing the existing balance sheet, following on the recommendations of the Capital Adequacy Framework Report, which was set up under the Italian presidency, but taken up very rigorously under the Indonesian presidency. And one of the things which we have closely looked at is how to therefore fully implement the Capital Adequacy Framework Report, which of course will greatly enhance the lending capability of the multilateral development banks. In addition to this, as we go forward, we have made some estimates of the likely financial requirement, which broadly speaking, to share with you, is $3 trillion a year between now and 2030, out of which $2 trillion will come from domestic resource mobilization, and $1 trillion will need to come from concessional and non-concessional finance, 500 billion from private capital, 500 billion from substantially improving the existing lending capability of the MDB family, which, if I might tell you, if you add all the MDBs, in an average year, like 2019, the average year lending was close to just $120 billion. Our recommendation, if accepted, is designed to take this 120 billion closer to the 400 billion mark, which therefore entails a number of measures. One, of course, is the harnessing of the Capital Adequacy Framework Report, harnessing private capital, and of course, it also entails an increase in the recapitalization of the banks to improve the ability of the banks to enhance their lending operations.
Yeah, it's important that you point out that even without enhancing the capital, there are other things that the World Bank group and the other institutions can do simply by harnessing private capital better. And there have been other scholars who point out that the World Bank need not use its efforts to once again measure the GDP forecasts, which is anyway being done by OECD and IMF, and that they should work. I mean, there have been these welter of comments coming in. But what do you think is, I mean, since you know how the groups work, what do you think we can see implemented? Do you see, say, credit enhancement and better use of private capital happening very quickly? Which is the 1 or 2 points on which you are very confident?
Well, I think that I'm pretty confident that the recommendations relating to the Capital Adequacy Framework Report.
Okay.
I mean, right now, of course, they have an equity loan ratio. There have been some efforts to increase it at the last meeting of the spring meeting of the IMF and the World Bank, which looked at the World Bank's evolution, the report on the evolution of it, the World Bank's roadmap. We seek to enhance that equity loan ratio rather substantially, which will result in a very substantial increase in the lending capability of the World Bank Group. And equally, if this principle is applied to the multilateral development family as a whole, which means the Asian Development Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the African Development Bank, the Inter-American Bank, it will substantially enhance the lending capability. At the same time, efficiency, ease of business, and mitigating the risks of private capital would be a very, very part of this concerted effort.
Okay.
Of course, the fact that the shareholders will serve themselves better if the process of a somewhat enhanced capital, which they wish to put in, becomes part of this process, so that the shareholders send a powerful signal to credit rating agencies and to the market that they are behind this enhanced lending capability of the World Bank family, that everything works in harmony and in tandem.
Okay, fair point, sir. Now, finally, 2 political questions. One is something that you raised in one of the G20 meetings. I heard you. Voting is still skewed in favor of Europe and, of course, even in favor of the United States. Can the voting in these institutions be made pro-global South? And can organizations or umbrellas like the BRICS be used to weld the global South to put pressure and change the voting patterns?
Well, you know, it's a question of priority. At this moment, I think that if you read the first line of the Project Syndicate article, it says, the world is on fire.
Yes.
We do not have the luxury of time. We do not wish to waste at this moment our energies on rejigging the entire voting structure of the MDB system. Okay. We believe that we may be accused of kicking the can down. The IMF already is seeking to make progress by the December, and certainly by 25, on redoing the quotas of the IMF. Let us see what happens on that. But we do not wish to postpone the priority and the urgency of the other recommendations which we have made in terms of tripling the lending capability, tripling the mandate, and tripling the mechanism.
Okay.
That is a high priority for us because the world is on fire, as we have said.
Absolutely. So I think that is very pragmatic prioritization. Better do what we rather than, alight more fires which may take, long to be resolved. But just a final question, isn't the ambience and the political context kind of contrary to this? We are getting into a world where instead of cooperation, you have even more grabbing and snatching and blocks. At this juncture, do you think given international politics, you will be able to make headway even in these three very simple goals and very urgent goals of tripling, sustainable lending?
Well, let me tell you that there are some pleasant surprises.
Oh.
Would you, for instance, accept when I tell you that we got great support and wholehearted support from the Chinese delegation when they spoke on our recommendations in Gandhinagar?
Oh.
Would it be a surprise to you that for President Biden, not only in terms of the statement which he has made yesterday and day before, fully putting his weight behind the reform of the multilateral development banks, the fact that at the same time the Prime Minister of India, who has taken a lead on the reform of the multilateral development banks, was it a matter of accident that much before we assumed the presidency, Prime Minister Modi had already prioritized the reforms of the multilateral development banks as high up on his agenda?
Okay.
You see, this cuts across the normal perceptions of geopolitical divides.
Okay.
If the Chinese are fully behind the sort of increase which is being contemplated, tripling the capacity of the MDBs, and if we and many of of course the South is very much in favor of it, and the powerful support given by the President Biden on reforming on the philosophy of reforming the multilateral development banks, that I think is a happy configuration and a happy congruence of events in addressing what we called the world is on fire.
Okay. Let me conclude this part of the conversation by saying, "Aapke muh mein ghee shakkar." Let's hope that before our presidency gets over, some tangible progress is made in the very laudable goals that your independent expert group has set in terms of tripling.
But by the way,
Yes.
Can I just add,
Sure.
interrupt you to add, our presidency does not end on the 10th of September.
Okay.
Our presidency comes to an end only on the 30th of November, when we pass on the baton to Brazil, because so everything that happens after the summit and till the 30th of November, the tangible gains would be during our period of presidency.
Okay.
That is important to bear in mind, because there are many important other events to happen after the conclusion of the big summit.
Okay. Well, then there's even more time and even more reason to hope that the tangible goals you all have put on the table in terms of tripling of lending to sustainable goals does take off before November 30th itself. At least the first steps are taken. Dr. Singh, thank you very much for this, but I am going to detain you for another couple of questions on another important hat that you wear. You are the chairman of the 15th Finance Commission. I must squeeze in a couple of questions on the 16th Finance Commission in a minute after this break. Welcome back to this special chat with Dr. NK Singh. In the earlier part of the discussion, he was wearing the hat of the co-convener of the independent expert group of the G20. But now I'm requesting him to wear the hat of the chairman of the 15th Finance Commission, which is, of course, done and dusted and the recommendations accepted. But now the 16th Finance Commission will have to be appointed in this fiscal year. So, Dr. Singh, that question to you. We don't have much time to just cut to the chase. Do you think one of the key points before this Finance Commission is to put a cap on this increase in cesses? Although your Finance Commission asked for 42% of the shareable resources to go to the states, effectively only around 30 or 35% gets passed on, because 18.5% of the shareable resources come in the form of cesses and they are not shared. So do you think a cap is called for?
This is outside the mandate, Latha, of any finance commission. We were not oblivious of this. The fact that the share of cesses and surcharges have crept up substantially in recent years was something which we were deeply conscious of, even during our deliberations. But the rectification of this, Latha, is not in the hands of the Finance Commission.
Okay.
This requires a constitutional amendment.
Okay.
Please recall that in the year 2000, at the time of the 10th Finance Commission, while the definition of the divisible pool was enlarged to include all taxes, which means not any proportion, which included corporate tax, all indirect taxes in the pool of the divisible pool, it left out cesses and surcharges. So to address this, it will require a constitutional amendment,
Okay.
which is not in the hands of any Finance Commission.
Okay.
It is in the hands of Parliament to make the necessary amendment
Okay.
if they wish to cap in any way the percentage which should go in cess and surcharge. And equally, I would imagine that there are other important issues on which it's only Parliament which can take a view. For instance, the issue of whether or not union territory should be included is an issue on which it's not the Finance Commission which has a latitude. Or for instance, why some parts of the recommendation of the Finance Commission, as some chief ministers have recently pointed out, not been implemented. The President and Parliament is not obliged to in any way accept all the recommendations of the Finance Commission, because if you see the first part, it said to recommend the shareable taxes and for an action taken report to be presented to Parliament on each of the recommendations which have been made. It does not bind the sovereign to accept all the recommendations. So these are areas which are outside the ambit of any Finance Commission. They are in the realm of what Parliament chooses to do.
Absolutely. I mean, the Fiscal Council was recommended by the 14th Finance Commission. A Loan Council was recommended by, I think, by the 13th Finance Commission. The Parliament is not obliged. The President is not obliged to accept all those. I take your point on that. Very quickly, sir, last question. Do you want the proposed 16th Finance Commission to take up anything in terms of merit subsidies? Even this old pension scheme has now become an issue. Do you think they should comment something on that, on the nature of subsidies?
So you see, this will be part of the calculus. Subsidies are an expenditure, and you have to estimate what expenditure norms should be. You have to, of course, also estimate on the norms on revenue buoyancy and so on. So this is part of the process which any Finance Commission has to take, including the outgo on account of subsidies, merit or otherwise, is a matter of definition and a matter of interpretation. But certainly there is no escape from an analysis of expenditure and an analysis on the sort of revenue buoyancy which can be estimated.
So actually, you've just whetted our appetite. As and when the 16th Finance Commission is appointed, we will hope to have you again on the channel and to elaborate on what ought to be, should be the direction that the 16th Finance Commission should take. That debate for another day. Thank you very much for sparing time for us at CNBC-TV18.
Thank you very much, Latha. Thanks.